Well, welcome to my garden for this talk, this part of your Foundation Day service. I'm very sorry we're not together in person. I'm very sorry I missed the usual sight of many of you gathering in garish clothes outside the Lamb the day before this service. And I must confess before I begin, if I'm beginning to look a little bit stressed, we are now on take 3 of this talk. I thought it'd be rather nice. It was such a lovely day to be outside and to enjoy the sunshine. Take 1 had to pause because 2 magpies were fighting in the tree next door exceptionally loudly. So I had to lob a tennis ball at them and start again. Take 2 was going tremendously well. I think it's highly unlikely that this take will be as good as take 2. It was going tremendously well until a sudden unexpected gust of wind blew my short talk part of the way down the garden. So let's, pray, cross your fingers, stroke a lucky rabbit's foot, whatever it is you believe in, and let's hope we get through it this time. Let's hope I get through it this time. In some ways, I must say I feel massively honoured to be invited to give this talk for a second time at one of your Foundation Day events. And in some ways, I feel a bit bleak about what it represents for me. Because a year or two before I last gave this address, I think it was 2014. A year or two before that, another Church of England priest, a wonderful man called Reverend Nick Holtham, gave this talk. And shortly after giving this talk, he was made a bishop. And then a couple of years after I spoke at your Foundation Day service, the equally marvellous Reverend Rose Hunsford Wilkins spoke to you in this way. And shortly afterwards, my friends, she too was made a bishop. 6 years on, and at the second attempt, I'm still here in North London defying all the odds and resolutely failing to ascend to ecclesiastical greatness. Before I get on with things properly, I just want to say to those of you who are due to be sitting your GCSEs and A-levels this year, my heart goes out to you so much. I know I've got friends who've had their exams cancelled. I know how despondent some of them are feeling, and some of them have expressed to me that sense that so much work has been wasted or has been for nothing. And look, it hasn't been for nothing and it hasn't been wasted. It really hasn't. You can take exams away, but you can't take away your learning and your knowledge. And neither, very importantly, can you take away the really important ways in which you will have grown as people over the last few years, in which the disciplines you've gone through to work towards these exams will have shaped you. You've been building important foundations for the future, and those foundations can't simply be cancelled. And foundations are what I'd like to talk about today. What are our foundations? What's fundamental to us? On Good Friday, Christians meditate on the crucifixion of Jesus, and it's a time when we remember and pray for those who are suffering and for those who are dying. And so it was a great privilege for me this year, this Good Friday, to be invited to go and pray with staff at the North Middlesex Hospital. I was very aware that I was amongst people who know far more about the faces of suffering at this time than I can begin to imagine. And to ensure social distancing, the floor had been marked with black and yellow tape at 2 metre intervals. And the tape had been put on the floor in the shape of crosses. And for me, that formed a tremendously powerful image. Seeing those people at the heart of the fight against this pandemic, standing on crosses on Good Friday. It made me think about the ways in which, for me as a Christian, the self-sacrificial love which the cross represents is something which I'm called to make my stand on, something which should be fundamental to me, should be foundational. This coronavirus pandemic is leading all of us to assess and to reassess what matters most to us, what's truly fundamental and what's ephemeral, what can we live without. There's been a lot of talk about the importance of our key workers and our essential services. And largely speaking, they're people whom we've tended to take for granted. And many of them are amongst the lowest paid in our society. My goodness, haven't we discovered how important the people are who keep our supermarket shelves stocked? How essential the staff at our care homes and our nurseries, doctors and nurses and everyone who works in healthcare. How essential our rubbish collectors and our train and bus drivers. People who very often have been on the margins of our attention are now being recognised for the fundamental contribution they make to our common life. And that leads me to wonder if what we're discovering about society might also be true about ourselves as individuals too. What I mean is, do we always properly notice and value the things about ourselves which are foundational, which are fundamental to who we are as human beings? Do we see and properly value all that is amazing and beautiful and good and true about who we are and the difference that our lives can make? I'm a priest, I'm a parish priest. I take a lot of funerals, and I can tell you that when people remember a loved one's life, amongst all those things that they remember and treasure, exam results and how much money a person made have never ever been mentioned to me once in nearly 20 years as a parish priest. What is remembered is humour and generosity, kindness and wisdom. What is remembered is creativity and courage. What is remembered is love. And lastly, those magical words, and I'm mightily relieved that it looks as if we might get away with just 3 takes. I'd like to return to what I talked about at Foundation Day 6 years ago. It's also good to know where we're not so strong. It's good to know where sometimes there might be some cracks in our foundations. I spoke then and for the first time about my experience of depressive periods and how that has shaped me as a person. Nobody has perfect foundations. Nobody is all strength and no vulnerability. Having vulnerabilities is not a problem if we know where they are and what they are, and if we treat them with respect. We are rediscovering whose contribution to society really is fundamental to keeping our communities going. And lots of those key people have often been barely noticed or undervalued in the past. Perhaps we can use these strange long days of isolation and social distancing to get to know ourselves a little better, to see and to treasure all that is best in ourselves, especially those qualities of our character which in the past we might have overlooked or undervalued or simply taken for granted. Now usually at the end of this Foundation Day service there's a slap-up lunch back at school, but I'm assuming that's not happening today, and it's just going to be another tuna mayonnaise toasty for me. Well, I will hold you to that lunch sometime. I hope I get to share with you sometime. My friends, look after yourselves, look after each other, take care of your foundations, build and grow, dream and hope, and flourish. Flourish. Thank you.